I've been to the well 3 times. On the first time, I was 6. I went with my dad. My father had been reared on the outdoors. He lived for it. Every chance he got, he was out backpacking, fishing, hunting, anything. It was an addiction for him, one that would eventually kill him. 20 years after this story, he was climbing up a waterfall when he slipped and fell to his death. But he died doing what he loved, and he aimed to instill that love onto me. As a result, from the moment I could walk, I had spent more time in the woods than indoors. On this occasion, we were camping, as we had done many times before, though never in this area of the woods. Though my father sought to teach me as much as he could about the outdoors, he realized a 6-year-old wouldn't be much help setting up a tent. He told me not to wander too far and set to work grappling with the tent, promising me we would have some cookies once he had finished. That naturally excited my young self, and I was practically giddy as I bounced around waiting for him to finish. After several repeats of "Are you done yet?" and my dad's grunts becoming increasingly frustrated as the tent fought with him, he told me to go take a walk and come back in a few minutes. I headed off into the woods, listening to bird calls and trying to spot where they were coming from. After several minutes, I walked into a darker section of the woods. It was at this time where I noticed a peculiar smell emanating from somewhere nearby. It was the smell of baking cookies. Thinking my dad had finished, I excitedly ran off towards the smell, my young mind not comprehending my dad couldn't bake cookies in the woods or that the smell was coming from the opposite direction of my camp. I ran for 2 or 3 minutes before coming to a stop in a small clearing. The first thing I noticed was how much darker the woods were. This despite the fact that all the trees in the area were leafless, dead, and wilted. The ground was spongy, water or some other liquid flowed up with every step I took, squashing the already wilted grass. Then I saw the well. It was sitting in the middle of a clearing, a small circle of stones rising up 2 or 3 feet. Various tree roots had dug themselves into the stones as if trying to get to the water contained inside, though the trees themselves had long since wilted and died. There was no roof or bucket attached. I realized that's where the smell of cookies was emanating from. I approached and peered over the edge of the stones. There was no water in the well, just a seemingly endless pit of blackness. I picked up a stone and dropped it in, and never heard it hit the bottom. Then as I watched, a liquid silent bubbled up from the depths and came to a stop mere inches from my face. It had the consistency of water with a slightly cloudier appearance. I realized the liquid was the source of the smell of cookies. I stuck my face into the liquid and began to gulp it. The taste was almost indescribable. It tasted like cookies, along with candy and every other delicious item a 6-year-old could ever imagine. I knew at that moment I would never taste anything better than that liquid. I began gulping faster and faster, not even stopping to breathe. I couldn't imagine ever stopping. I wouldn't ever stop. I would stand here forever gulping down this delicious, heavenly, indescribable liquid from this well. My vision began to blur, my head became light. I kept on gulping the liquid. I felt something touch my shoulder. I ignored it, continued to aggressively gulp down the liquid. The touch turned to shaking. Something began pulling me away from the well. I kicked and screamed in protest, desperate not to be taken away from the liquid. I had to get more. I wanted more. I needed more. My eyes opened. I was sitting in the camp next to my dad, the tent finally up in one piece. My dad was holding a cookie out to me. "Here," he said. I took it and began nibbling it. It tasted nowhere as good as the liquid from the well. I looked out into the woods, but realized the smell from the well was gone. On the second time, I was 18. I went with my best friend. We had recently graduated high school, and to celebrate, we had gone for a week-long camping trip in the woods. Naturally, being the age we were, we brought along a fair amount of illicit substances and spent more time that week high than sober. I mostly stuck to weed and some mushrooms. My friend was into stronger substances. While I had been high most of the week, I'm fairly confident I was sober during this event. It was our last night before heading home, and I hadn't taken anything in the past few days since it was my job to drive us home in the morning. My friend was tripping on who knows what, and was lost in some cocktail of drugs, just staring at the sky and giggling intermittently. Eventually I got sick of listening to him and decided to take a walk. The last rays of sunshine dipping below the horizon gave the woods an eerie, unnatural appearance. Shadows seemed to stretch and bend in every direction, giving the woods a wild and untamed appearance. It looked far different than the first time I had been here. Not that I would have remembered anyway. I had long since repressed my memories of the well, and it was only this encounter with it that would bring my memories back to my mind. At some point, I began to smell something indescribable. I truly have no words for it. It wasn't like the baking cookies from the last time. Something much more ethereal, but just as unimaginably attractive. I followed the smell into the same clearing as before, and there the well was, sitting just as it had been. The smell continued to draw me in closer. At that point, I noticed something strange. There was the skeleton of a deer laying next to the well. It had its head down into the well, as if it had died while drinking from it. I suspect it did. Littered around it were several rotting carcasses of wolves, having been drawn to the well by the deer. Somewhere in the corners of my mind, alarm bells went off, and I was overcome with the most overpowering sense of déjà vu. But the smell was too overwhelming. I looked down into the well. The water, or some other liquid, silently rose towards me. It had the same milky quality it had before, but the smell had changed. Without a moment of hesitation, I dunked my head in and began inhaling as much liquid as I could. It was just as amazing as I remembered, maybe even better. I began scooping water into my hands so I wouldn't have to stop even when I lifted my head to breathe. I drank and drank, desperate to get more of this indescribable heavenly substance into my mouth. I began to clamber into the well, desperate to bathe in the liquid, to absorb it through every pore in my body. My head became light, my vision blurred. The slurred speech of my roommate stirred me as he shook my shoulder. Through his days of semi-conscious words, he told me it was time to get to bed. I found myself back at the tent, and we were headed into our sleeping bags. I didn't sleep at all that night. I was too focused on the well. My memories of the encounter when I was 6 came back. I was filled with a desperate sense to go back and drink from it once more, but something told me it was a bad idea, and I managed to resist the temptation. We packed up and left in the morning. After that summer, I moved away for college. My best friend stayed in town for his school. Over the years, his drug problem became worse, and when we were both juniors, he died of an overdose. I went back home for the funeral, then left again. I stayed away for many years until finally, love and circumstance brought me back home, back to the well. On the third time, I was 40. I went with my wife. The well was calling out to me. I sensed it from the moment I entered those woods. My wife had never heard my encounter with the well, and seemed unaffected by the smell. The smell was different again, but still indescribable, absolutely irresistible. It seemed to pour from every orifice and tree within the forest. As soon as we finished setting up our tent, I told my wife I was going on a walk. She plopped herself into a lawn chair, lit up a cigarette, and told me to have fun. I walked with purpose. I didn't know where I was going, but I did know the well would lead me to itself. The contagion from the well seemed to have spread. A much larger area of sodden ground and dead trees. The influence of the well was growing. I rounded a corner and there it was. The extraordinary liquid just waiting for me to take a taste. The deer skeleton was gone. There was a man there, and he was alive. His back was towards me, and he didn't seem to notice me as I approached. He was on his knees, head inside the well. I heard him lapping from the liquid like a dog. I walked up to him and tried to get his attention. He ignored me. I shook his shoulder. He shook me off and continued drinking. Finally, I wrenched him from the well and made him face me. His pupils were gone. In their place were just pure white orbs that seemed to function as eyes. He was emaciated. His skin was pulled tight over his thin body. His stomach was bloated, though it only contained liquid, no food whatsoever. He seemed to be only days away from starvation. His legs appeared to be just useless appendages. He had been kneeling for so long. His jaw hung open, he seemed to be unable to close it. I let out a yelp and jumped back. The man regarded me for a moment with his white orb-like eyes, then he turned and resumed his lapping from the well. I turned and ran until I collapsed at the feet of my wife. She asked me what was wrong. I told her I just saw a bear. We packed up the tent and moved to a different spot in the woods. I swore then I would never return to that well. For 20 years I was able to keep that promise, but then my wife died of lung cancer. I felt the well calling to me once again, and I was too overwhelmed with grief to resist. On the fourth time, I'm 60. I go alone. The forest is dying. The well's infection is only spreading faster as time goes on. Every dead tree, every animal carcass, from everything in those woods pours the smell of the well. The smell is indescribable, but it seems to smell like peace. I want peace. At least the illusion of peace. I need to move on, but I know the well doesn't help with that. It is the well of wants. It gives you what you want, not what you need. And now, all I want is to dunk my head into that heavenly well and never, ever lift it again. That is exactly what I plan to do. This story comes from Reddit from user Vertjoublie. Thanks for letting me read your story.